Hi everyone, hope you're all well. So the practice I've got planned for this week is a bit of TLC for our spine and pelvic area. So the practice is going to consist of sort of three types of movement really. The first type being movements that help to soften and release. The second type of movement is going to be around resetting and also lengthening. And the last type of movement is going to be around strengthening the spine and the pelvic area. So we're going to need a fair bit of equipment, but most of it is optional. So if you don't have this or you can't kind of sort of make it in some way at home for yourself, don't worry yet. So the first thing we're going to be using is one of our red balls. And I know some of you already have one of these at home. So if you've got it, great, we can use it. If not, where I use it, you just do without. It's absolutely fine. We've got a belt here. Again, most of you can easily make one of those at home. I've got a couple of blankets, I've got a bolster. Again, you can use the at-home version that I showed you a few videos ago, but again, if you haven't got that or you don't want to make one, you can do without. It's just an optional extra. A block or something that resembles this. This is something that we will need actually, so if you can get hold of something like that, that'd be ideal. And the last thing is going to be a chair. So hopefully you can gather all those bits and bobs again. I'll write that in the email as well because I know it is quite a lot for the practice this week. So we're going to start, and we're going to start our practice today lying down. You might be pleased to know. So we're going to come into constructive rest. So you're all really familiar with this. So we've got our feet on the floor, knees pointing up towards the ceiling. I'm going to use my ball for this as well. If you have one at home, go for it. If not, don't worry. And I've got my ball kind of barely inflated, so I've just got that little channel of air between the hands there when I squeeze it. And that's going to be for underneath my pelvis. So I'm going to come to lay down. So if you've got a ball, you're going to place that underneath the sort of sacrum and pelvic area. So it's floating the spine. If you're fortunate enough to have two balls at home, you can also have a semi-inflated one underneath the head as well and float the sort of the spine right from the base up to the top of the head. But that's just an optional extra if you've got that to hand. And I'm going to encourage you to place the hands either at the sides of the body with the palms facing up, or if you would like to, you can place the hands somewhere on the abdomen. So you might place both hands maybe near the pelvic area and the lower belly, or you might want to place one hand up towards the heart centre and the other hand down towards the pelvic area. I think that's where I'm going to go today. So finding what's going to work for you. And I'm going to invite you to soften and close your eyes here as well. And we're simply going to spend a few moments here allowing ourselves to rest and settle down into the support of the floor here. And becoming aware of how we are feeling as we arrive at our practice today. So like I said, we're going to be giving the spine, the pelvis a bit of TLC, and as we all know, that's going to affect other areas as well. So scanning through the body, getting a sense of how the spine and the pelvis are feeling. Maybe noticing any niggles, aches, pains as we travel down along the spine. And noticing how our breath is. Where can we get a sense of the breath moving? Can we get a sense of the breath moving along the whole of our spine here? And don't worry if you can't, that's fine. Sometimes it's quite nice to bring the hands onto the crown of the head. It can often give you a sense of how the breath can travel right up to the crown of the head. So as you inhale, You might get a sense of the head moving in some way around the hands, and as you exhale, again noticing how the breath moves, how the head moves against the hands. So constructive rest pose, whether you're on the soft ball or your pelvis is flat against the floor, it's a really good pose to help us reset everything and to bring a bit of length back into the spine, and also to establish those natural curves of the spine. So it's quite nice to scan through the spine and noticing those natural curves. So starting kind of up at the very top of our spine, the base of the skull, and that might make contact with the floor. As we travel down sort of through the neck, you might get a sense of the neck lifting away from the floor. And as we come to the upper back, the thoracic spine, you might get a sense of that curving towards the floor, so it makes contact. And then as we travel through down to the lumbar spine, again you might feel that lifting, that curve lifting up away from the floor. And then travelling back down towards the sacrum and the tail, and noticing the points of contact there. So if you're working with the ball, just taking that from underneath the pelvis now, bringing the pelvis back down towards the floor. And let's lengthen the legs out long on our mat. And make sure your heels, if you're working on a mat, making sure your heels are on your sticky mat here for what we're going to do next. So we're going to begin to rock through the spine. So how we do this, I'm going to establish this little pulsing movement from my feet, like a little flap of my feet. And that travels all the way up through my body, up through and out the crown of my head. And again, you can place the hands onto the crown of the head if you want to here, to get a sense of that movement. So this kind of pulsating movement is really good for helping to promote synovial fluid, so kind of juicing up and hydrating the spine. It's also good for promoting the movement of lymph through the body, so a good boost for our immune systems. It's also quite nice to get rid of any inertia in the system as well. So it's a nice kind of balancing movement. So if you're kind of happy with that rocking movement, we can add in the arms as a little extra here, but if you find when you add in the arms that distracts you from this pulsing movement, stick with that, yeah, stick with the pulsing movement, that's the most important thing here. But if you do want to add in the arms, we're going to stay soft in the wrists, and we're going to draw the elbows in towards each other, and I'm going to track the arms up and over the head. And then tracking the arms back down through the centre. And repeating that movement of the arms back and forth. And if all's well, if you've managed to kind of get a good rhythm going, so you've got the pulsing going, you might have the arms tracking over the head. You can add in this little kind of sideways lateral movement as well. So we can track the arms up over the head, back down through the centre. We can make a little turn towards one side, coming back to the centre, a little turn to the other side, coming back to the centre, and then drawing the arms back down. And we can repeat that little sequence a few times if you're comfortable. And like I said, if the pulsing movement suffers as a result of that, coming back to just that rocking and that pulsing movement, that's the most important thing here. And then also noticing how the breath is affected by this movement. So if you want to let any exhalations out through the mouth, feel free. Letting the jaw soften. You might want to work with the mouth slightly open. So if you are working with this movement in the arms, letting that go, but keeping the pulsing going. So you can let the arms come to the sides of the body, letting the pulsing continue for a few more moments here. And then eventually letting that fizzle out. You can release the legs, let the legs kind of splay out to the sides of your mat. And feeling the impact of that. So you might get a sense of this kind of shimmering sensation through the whole of the spine. The breath might have been affected. And then let's gather the knees in towards the chest and have a little rock from side to side there. And then bringing the feet back down onto the mat. And just get a sense of how the spine feels now. So let's quickly scan through those curves of the spine again. They might feel a bit different just after what we've done. So thinking about the back of the skull, base of the skull in contact with the floor. As we travel through to the neck, you might feel that that part of the spine is lifted away. And then as we come to the upper back and between sort of the shoulders, we might get a sense of that part of the spine being in contact with the floor. And then as we travel further down the spine, coming towards the lower back, we might feel the spine lifting up away from the floor, coming to our lumbar. And then as we come down to the sacrum area, again, that might make contact with the floor again. And as we come to the tail kind of scoops up and away from the floor. Getting a sense of the whole of the spine here. Rolling over onto one side, and let's bring ourselves up from there. We're going to flip over onto our front. So again, I'm going to use my ball here as an optional extra. Again, if you haven't got it, it's absolutely fine to do this without. So I'm coming onto my front, and I'm going to place the ball underneath one of my hips in that little well of the hip joint. And you can either let the forehead come down towards the mat, or you can turn the head to one side. And we're going to bend the knee, and we're going to make these circular movements from deep within the hip. And it's also going to be having an impact on our lower back. You can even put a hand there to feel the impact of that, feeling that movement deep, deep into the lower back. And as always, we can kind of experiment a little with these movements, so you can make your circle a bit smaller, more contained, or you might want to make it a bit bigger. And then changing the direction of our circle. And again, playing about, noticing what you notice. So I find when I make my circle a little smaller, as I come to that kind of outward rotation movement in my hip, it's a little bit jarring, so I have to really slow down. And then coming back to a still place. I'm going to release that foot back down towards the floor. If you're working with your ball, keep it there. If not, it's absolutely fine. We're going to lift the knee and bring the leg into a little bit more of a right angle position to our body. And the movement we're going to make here, we're going to think about feeding the thigh right from the head of the femur, right from the top of the thigh bone. And we're going to feed it back and forth. So I'm sliding that leg back and forth, and depending on what type of surface you're working on, I'm quite lucky because this floor is quite slidey, but if you're working on carpet or something, you might need to put a blanket down or something, or a piece of paper works quite well to slide the leg back and forth. Depends what clothes you've got on as well, so you might have to play about a little bit with that. And again, as always, you might find that there's a phase of the movement that favours an in-breath, a phase that favours an out-breath. So allowing that breath to support the movement. And then eventually letting go of that. If you're working with a ball, you're going to get rid of that. And let's bring the foot and the leg back down to lengthen out along the mat and feel the difference between the two sides. How that first leg feels in comparison to the leg that you haven't worked with yet. And also noticing how your back feels on that side that you've been working with as well. So you might notice something that has changed down in the lower back area. So coming up from there, and we're going to do the opposite side. So you might just need to place your ball the other side, you might need to turn around like I just have. So placing the ball on this second hip now if you're working with the ball, and then bending the knee, and we're going to come to make these circular movements in the leg. Apologies, my cat might jump across the screen any minute now. He's looking like he's about to, so apologies if he does. So taking your awareness right deep into the hip and feeling that movement of the hip in its socket and the quality of that movement. And again, you might want to make your circuit, there he goes, a bit smaller or a bit bigger. And then changing the direction. And bringing your awareness deep into the lower back. And then eventually letting go of that movement, letting the foot come back down to the floor. We're going to bring the knee and the leg up now to sort of a right angle to our body, and we're going to make that movement, that second movement, really feed the leg out from the hip. So we're sliding that thigh back and forth. And it doesn't need to be a particularly big movement, yeah, it could just be a very small sliding back and forth, or you might want to make it a bit of a longer slide, whatever feels good. There's no right or wrong or better or worse here. It's just about how that's going to land in your body. And also noticing how this differs to your first side. And soon enough, we'll be done on this second side. So when you're done, if you're working with the ball, getting rid of that and coming to let the leg belong on the mat. And taking on board how that's affected this second side. And also paying attention to your breath. Let's use the hands as supporters. We're going to come up from there and we're going to take this into a wide-legged child pose here. So keeping the toes together, let's separate the knees wide and we're going to lengthen along the mat, bringing the forehead down if that allows. A few breaths here. And then walking the hands back towards the knees, coming up from there. So the next movement we're going to do, we actually did this I think in last week's video. We're going to revisit it and I'm going to add on a couple of different things this time. So hopefully from last week you'll know what works for you. So we're going to use our block. Now last week, from what I remember, I think I put it in so it was kind of the sort of the smallest way round. This week, if your back can tolerate it, we're going to go for widthways on the block. So I'm going to place that in between my thighs. My feet are on the floor, the knees are up towards the ceiling. And I'm going to come to lay back on the ground and let the arms rest at the sides of the body with the palms facing up. So last week what we did, I think we pressed when we were on an exhalation. We're going to change it up a little bit this week. So we've got the block widthways, and instead of pressing on the exhalation, we're actually going to press the thighs together on an inhalation. So when you're ready, we're going to repeat this a few times. After your next exhalation, next time you inhale, we're going to squeeze the block between the thighs on our inhalation. And releasing as we exhale. And we're going to repeat that a few times. So again, as we inhale, squeezing the block between the thighs. Releasing as we exhale. So let's say around 5 more rounds with that variation. And once you've completed your 5 rounds, taking the block out, and again lengthening out the legs along your mat and getting a sense of how that feels in the back. So let's bring the knees in towards the chest again. Let's have another little rock from side to side, and eventually we're going to bring ourselves back up from there. So the next thing we're going to do is going to involve either your homemade bolster, which I'm going to use a bolster for today, or you can use nothing at all, which is fine, or you can also use a few blankets and stack them up to give you a little bit of height. It's entirely up to you, and it's about what feels good in your back as well. So even if you have your bolster or you have blankets, it might be that you actually prefer to do this without anything underneath the pelvis. So I'll show you where we're going to go with this. So we're going to come to bring our pelvis either on our bolster or on our stack of blankets, or we're simply going to let it rest against the floor. I've got my feet on the floor and my knees are up towards the ceiling, so my legs aren't long here, they're bent. I'm going to let the arms come to rest either at the sides of the body, or you might want to let them rest on the belly. So my pelvis, like I said, is on the raise here, whatever that may be for you, or it might be against the floor. So even here, if you have got the pelvis raised, it can be quite a nice opening for the front of the chest, a nice opening for the diaphragm, and also around sort of the front of the hips as well. So we're just going to spend a few moments here enjoying that. And then we're going to make some variations here to help sort of target our psoas area. So let's draw one leg in towards us. So I'm going to go with my left leg. It's entirely up to you which one you go with first. So I'm going to draw my left knee in towards me, and I'm taking a hold and I'm drawing that knee in towards me. And my foot is nice and active. And then my right leg, my opposite leg, I'm going to lengthen out along the floor, and I'm going to reach out through my heel, but being mindful that I'm not locking into the back of the knee. So reaching out through my heel, but not pushing into the back of my knee. And I'm just going to spend a few breaths here. So again, whether your pelvis is on the floor, raised on some blankets, or raised up on a bolster, yeah, this is the movement that we're going to be making. So we've got one leg drawn in towards us and the other leg is lengthened out along the floor. A few breaths here. And then to come out, the leg that's lengthened along the floor, I'm going to draw that foot so it comes back into contact with the floor. And the left foot can come down and meet it. And then opposite side, so drawing in the opposite knee towards you, being nice and active in that foot, and then again lengthening out. In this instance, it's my left leg along the floor and reaching out through the heel without locking into the back of the knee. And again, a few breaths here. And then again, to come out, I'm going to place the sole of this leg that's extended out along the floor back onto the mat. And then the right leg can come down and join it. The next part of this movement, we're going to draw that first knee in again towards us. Same as before, being nice and active in the foot. I'm actively drawing this knee in towards me as well. I'm not letting the leg kind of be passive here. So I'm drawing that knee in towards me. The foot's nice and active. And then the opposite leg, I'm going to lift up from the floor. I'm going to draw the knee in towards me. And then I'm going to reach the sole of that foot up towards the ceiling. So I'm being nice and active in that foot. And then I'm going to begin to descend that heel down towards the mat, and as I'm doing that, I'm actively trying to keep this knee drawing in towards me so that the pelvis isn't tilting towards the end of your mat. And keep going with that. The floor will feel a long way away, and eventually the heel will touch the floor, and then that's our cue to draw that leg in again and make another circuit. I'm going to go about 5 times in total with this, so I've just finished my second, so I'm going to go 3 more. So working at your own pace here. Again, if you're working without a lift in the pelvis, that's fine. You're going to do this movement still as I'm showing it, but with the pelvis in contact with the floor. If you're working on a stack of blankets, you might not be quite as high as you are with a bolster, depending on how high you've stacked your blankets. And if you do feel like it's uncomfortable in the back for any reason, if you are on a raise, just take it out, bring the pelvis back down onto the floor. So I think I'm just about to complete my 5th. I'm not really in keeping count, but it's about my 5th. So then I'm going to bring both feet back down onto the floor. And then I'm going to come to do the opposite side. So I'm going to draw the opposite knee in towards me. So again, I'm quite actively drawing that knee in towards me, being active in the foot. And then this opposite leg, again, I draw it in towards me as I pick it up away from the floor. I'm going to extend up towards the ceiling, and I'm going to reach long out through the heel. And I'm going to keep actively drawing this knee in towards me so that my pelvis isn't tilting towards the end of my mat. Again, the floor will feel a long way away, and then my heel will touch down, and then we go again. So again, about 5 times here. So I think I'm on my 5th. I might not be, but when you've done your 5 in total, again, bringing both feet back down onto the ground. If you are working with a raise, just taking that out from underneath the pelvis for a moment and letting the legs lengthen out along the floor. Again, another opportunity maybe to scan through the back, noticing the curves, if anything's changed. And if it's uncomfortable to have the legs extended out along the floor for any reason, yet always coming back into this constructive rest setup. Let's draw the knees in towards the chest and have a little rock from side to side. Let's come all the way over onto one side, and we're going to bring ourselves up from there. So we're going to do 2 things from standing using the chairs. It's mostly a floor-based practice for today. So I've got my chair here. So the first thing I'm going to use it for is to do a little bit of work in lunge. And actually I'll show you first before you have a go at this. So one of the reasons I'm doing this is quite often, just trying to think the best way to show it, yeah. Quite often when we are in our lunge on the floor, we tend to, and I definitely am part of this camp, we tend to collapse in our pelvis. I don't know if you can see that there. And we tend to tilt the pelvis and push into our lumbar spine as opposed to keeping this more neutral pelvis and bringing the movement into the hip flexor by coming forwards as opposed to down, yeah. So that's quite common, and also it can be quite a strain for some of those on the knee. So I want to show you this little variation with the chair. So if you're someone whose back troubles you in lunge at all, or if your knees trouble you in lunge at all, this is a really good alternative. And even if your back doesn't trouble you, it's just a really useful way to kind of work on this stability in the pelvic area. So how it works, we're going to place one foot onto the chair. So I'm finding that stability in the pelvis. So if I'm not tilting the pelvis forward and I'm not tilting it back. If I had a kind of a piece of string coming out, it would be going directly down towards the floor. And the movement I make, instead of kind of collapsing forward, it's a leaning forward. So you can see there's very little actual disturbance in my pelvic area there. And I lean forward, and you'll feel it in the back of the calf more than likely. And you might feel it a little bit more into the hip flex. And you can see I kind of bring my hands around my pelvis just to really feel the position, that I'm not collapsing in the front of the pelvis. So you'll feel, hopefully, this little bit of engagement around the lower belly, which is going to help support our lower back. If you're happy with that, if that feels okay, we can draw the arms up over the head. Few breaths here. And then releasing the arms and stepping that foot back down towards the ground. And then just noticing the difference between the two sides. So noticing how that standing side feels in comparison to the leg that was on the chair. And then let's go with the opposite side. So again, I'm placing my opposite foot on the chair, checking in with the pelvis, and the movement I'm going to make is a travelling forwards, not down, forwards. And again, it doesn't need to be a huge amount either. So we've got that little switching on, that containment, the pelvis is stable. We're not pushing into the lumbar spine, and we're not pushing into sort of all the organs that sit at the front of the body, particularly in the pelvic region as well. Few breaths here, and again, if you want to fall as well, you might want to bring the arms up over the head. And then releasing the arms, stepping that foot back down onto the mat, and just getting a sense of how that whole area feels now, especially around the lower back. And then I'm going to flip my chair around, so I'm going to do a downward dog with my chair now as well. So again, quite used to this, we've done this a few times. I'm going to bring my hands onto the back of my chair. I'm going to step my feet back, and I'm going to lengthen out from my tail out through the crown of my head. And again, this little switching on around the pelvic area, so I'm not letting the pelvis kind of sway forwards. So my lower back should feel nice and neutral here. And then stepping the feet forwards from there. So you can pop your chair to one side. And then the next little bit of exploring we're going to do is in our cobra pose. So again, something that we've been doing a few times in the last few videos in our sun salutation sequence. So I'm coming onto my front and I'm coming onto my forearms, and my elbows are underneath my shoulders, and my hands and my forearms are kind of parallel with the outer edges of my mat. And I'm going to lift one foot up and lengthen it back, and I'm really being active into the top of that foot. Again, I'm lifting one foot up and lengthening back, being really active in the top of the foot. So if that doesn't feel comfortable in the back for any reason, what can be a nice way to work as well is with the elbows slightly further forwards and the forearms turned out slightly. So that might be an option. If all else fails, so leave it out, yeah. So I'm actually going to work in this setup here because it's quite nice on my back today. And we're simply going to spend a few breaths here. So the feet and the legs are still nice and active. And I'm kind of channeling my cat and cow pose here. So as I inhale, you might notice this little rounding and flexing of my back. And as I exhale, it's like I'm allowing my heart to come through between the tops of my arms. So the breath is supporting the movement here. And then let's bring the elbows wide, forehead down. Using the hands to support as I'm going to lift my bottom up and back towards my heels. I'm going to let you decide here. You can either make it a wide-legged child pose, or you can make it a bit more of a contained child pose by bringing the knees and the feet more in line with the hips and folding over the tops of the thighs, either with the arms forwards or resting back behind, or you might want to use the arms and the hands to support the head. So a couple of options, I'll show you those again. So it might be a wide leg child pose with the arms lengthened out, or a more contained child pose with the feet and the knees more in line with the hips. Again, a few breaths here. A third option I've just thought, if you've got your homemade bolster, third option, which is really nice, is to bring the legs into this wide leg child pose setup, and is to come forwards over your bolster as well. That's another option. So when you're ready, coming up from there, and we're going to flip over onto our back again. So we're going to do a little bit of work to strengthen around the abdominal area, particularly the lower abdominals, to help support the lower back. Again, this is something I think we've done in class a good while ago, but it's nice to revisit these things. So I'm coming on my back, and I'm bringing my hands interlaced behind my head. And what I want to do here, I want to take the curve out my lower back. So I'm purposefully flattening my lower back. Can you see the difference between this and this? Yeah. So I'm purposely flattening my lower back here. And as I do that, I can feel this real engagement and this real switch on here around the sort of the abdominal muscles in that area. So you can have a little play with that. You can let it go, and then you can switch that area on, let that curve disappear. So that's something I always recommend, but for the purposes of this, that's what we want. And then maintaining that, so keeping that, I'm going to lift my feet up away from the floor, and I'm maintaining that engagement around the belly, the lower belly, and I'm trying to sort of flatten that curve towards the floor. And the first movement we're going to make is some heel taps. So nice and slowly, and I'm keeping that engagement. I'm going to tap one heel and then the next, nice and slowly towards the floor. And it should feel like there's a lot of engagement in that sort of lower abdominal area. All the time we're trying to keep that flattening of the lower back. So if I just kind of let that go, yeah, you can see there's not much in it there, but if I maintain that flattening and that engagement of the lower belly, so ideally we would do this for about a minute. I don't know how long we've been doing it for, but you might want to have a rest. You might be okay to keep going. So ideally around a minute. We'll do a few more just for luck, and then we'll do the second variation. So when you think you've done about a minute's work, letting go of that completely, maybe give the pelvis, the tops of the thighs a bit of a jiggle. And then when you're ready, we're going to create that engagement around the lower belly again. I'm going to lift the feet up away from the floor. And I'm going to make the same movement, except this time instead of heels, I'm going to tap my toes. And for me, and I'd be interested actually to hear your experience of this, but for me, it brings it a little bit more into sort of the midsection of my abdominals as opposed to the lower abdominals, which the heels seem to target for me. But it could be different for you, so yeah, let me know. And again, we want to do about a minute's worth of these. They are strong. It's not easy to talk and do them. And the key is to make it a real sort of slow movement. Incredibly strengthening though. And I'm going to say that's about a minute. Letting go of that, giving the pelvis, the tops of the thighs, a bit of a jiggle there. And bringing the arms back down to the sides of the body. So we're going to do a little bit of work in rolling bridge pose, and then we'll do a bit of work to reset the sides of the spine, and then we'll do a bit of work to open up the backs of the legs, and then we'll rest down. So let's come to do some work in rolling bridge. So what you can do for this, if you have your kind of your block or whatever you're using as a substitute for that, you can use that for this. So I'll show you how to do that. So just as before, I'm going to place the block, as we did before, widthways, in between my thighs. My bottom's fairly close to my heels for bridge pose. And I'm going to bring the arms at the sides of the body with the palms facing down. So having the block here, it's quite useful because it really helps to engage the inner edges of the thighs and kind of prevents the legs from splaying out to the sides of the body, which in turn can make sort of a pinching sensation in the lower back. So again, this is quite useful for stability around the pelvis and stability in the lower back. If you don't want to use a block, that's absolutely fine. So we're going to let the weight pour into the feet. Feet are nice and active. We let the weight pour into the feet. The pelvis becomes light. We begin to pick the pelvis up away from the floor. And if you're working with the block, you'll probably notice that the inner legs begin to squeeze on the block, which is a good sign. We want that. I'm going to peel my spine up away from the floor till I come to the top of my bridge, or the top of your bridge. And then we're going to roll back down. Let's do about 4 more of those, and then we'll add in the arms. So working at your own pace, but really trying to touch all parts of the spine as we roll up and down. What you can also use in place of a block, if you have one of those balls, you can inflate it fully and you can use that in between the thighs. That works quite well. So once you've completed the 4 of your roll and bridge, we can add in the arms if you want to. So next time we roll up, we can sweep the arms up over the head. And using the arms will create some traction in the upper back. So really reaching through the arms, beginning to roll back down through the spine. And don't worry about the arms making contact with the floor. Yeah, it's more about lengthening the arms. And as the pelvis comes back down, we can sweep the arms back down to the sides of the body. So let's do another 3 or 4 of those with that variation. And always observing the breath and seeing how the movements can follow the breath. So I'll talk through my breath cycle for this last round as I do it. It might be useful for you. If not, don't worry about it. So as I start, I inhale. And it's like my tailbone presses into the floor as I inhale. Yeah, it's the very base of my spine, so you can see how my lower back's really arched there. As I exhale, I let the weight begin to pour into my feet, and I can feel my pelvis now tipping the opposite way. It's like the pelvis tips back towards me as I exhale. And then I can begin to peel the spine up away from the floor. And I then inhale again as I draw the arms up over the head, or should I say I inhale, my arms follow by drawing up over the head. And then as I exhale, my back begins to descend back down towards the floor. My arms come to the sides of the body, and then I inhale again. You can see I'm back to where I started. I've got that arch in my lower back, my tail's towards the floor, and then I repeat all that again. But it could be that your breath cycle works differently, yeah, but I'm just showing you kind of how the breath can support our movements. So once you've completed there, if you're working with your block, putting that to one side, I'm going to take my belt. You can do this without a belt though. I'm going to use the belt for a bit of purchase. So I'm going to draw one knee in towards me. I'm going to place the belt around the ball of that foot, and I'm going to extend that foot up towards the ceiling. And to start with, and I know I say don't do this, but I'm going to ask us to lift the pelvis up away from the floor. So we're going to lift the pelvis. And the reason we're doing that is because we can then be really conscious about drawing the back of the pelvis back down into contact with the mat. And I do mean the pelvis, yeah, so we should still have a little bit of an arch in the lower back there. That should still be there. So it's the back of the pelvis, not the back of the waist, that's in contact with the floor. I'm going to pause here for a few breaths. You've got the option to lengthen out that opposite leg along the floor if you wish. A few breaths here, being nice and gentle and light in the hands. Anchoring down into the pelvis. And then release. Letting the legs lengthen out, noticing the difference between the two sides. And then let's come to the opposite side, drawing the opposite knee in towards you, placing the belt around the ball of that foot. Like I said before, we might want to purposely lift the pelvis up away from the floor. And in doing that, we can be really conscious and mindful of letting it descend back down into contact with the mat. And again, you've got the option to extend the opposite foot out along the floor if you so wish. And again, a few breaths here. There is one more thing we're going to do before we come to rest down after this. So, once you feel like you've done enough on this second side, coming to release, letting both legs lengthen out along the floor. So there's one more thing we're going to do. I actually meant to do it before we come into Supta Padangusthasana then, but it doesn't matter. We can do it now. So we're just going to do a little bit of a sequence to reset the sides of our spine, so the big QL muscles at the sides of our spine. And I think we did this last week as well, so should be familiar territory now. So I'm lining my shins up with the outer edge of my mat, and I'm bringing my legs into a 90-degree angle, and I'm going to come to lay on my side. I'm using this lower arm to support my head. And then the first movement we make is we simply lift this top foot away, this top leg away from the lower leg. So the thighs are staying together, it's just that top lower leg that's moving. Around 5 times. The second part of the movement is we pick up both lower legs away from the floor. And again, about 5 times. And then the last part of the movement, I'm going to use this top arm to simply support the weight of my head. I'm not going to pull. And the movement comes from this sort of midsection of our side. I'm going to lift the legs and the head, and it doesn't need to be a big lift at all. As long as the movement's coming and being instigated from here. And again, aiming for around 5 times. And then once we've completed on that first side, flipping over onto our second side. So again, the lower legs, the shins in line with the outer edge of the mat, bringing the legs to 90 degrees and coming to use this lower arm to support my head. And then we're going to make that first movement where we lift just one leg, the top leg. And then bringing both the lower legs up away from the floor. And then finally, using this top arm to support the head. And we're going to lift the legs and the head, making the movement from that midsection of our side. And then letting all that go. Let's just one last time before we rest down. Let's come onto the back. Let the legs lengthen out along the floor. And noticing how the back of the body feels now after the practice that we've completed. So again, maybe having a quick scan through those curves in the spine. So we're going to come to rest down, and I'm going to give you another option as well tonight. So using all what's available to you. So if you want to use one of the other variations that we've done previously, that's absolutely fine. I'm going to make a suggestion to invert the legs tonight, but again, you don't have to do that. So I'm just going to add a bit of extra cushioning to my chair here, but it could be at home. You might be able to use the side of a bed. You might be able to use the sofa, so you might not have to do any of this, or your chair just might be a bit more comfortable than mine. And I am going to put a little raise on the back of this chair because it's got a bit of a slope on it, and I want my heels to be in contact with the chair. Yeah, sometimes depending on proportions, the heels can kind of lift up away when we do that. So if that's the case, just put a bit of a raise there so that the heels have got something to rest down onto. So come on, we come onto our side, roll onto our back, and we bring ourselves onto the chair. So you can see my heels are nicely down on the chair. Sometimes they can kind of lift up away, but this is working with that little lift at the back. You want to make sure your pelvis is in contact with the floor as well, so you don't want the pelvis lifted up away from the floor either. So once you've got yourself set up there in whatever way, so you could just be laying down on the ground, you could be in constructive rest, or you could be coming into this inverted position. with the legs bent. Getting yourself set up there and making sure you're going to be warm enough, yeah, because we're going to use this as our kind of shavasana, our relaxation for the end of the practice today. So if you want to put on socks, jumpers or anything like that, get that set up for yourself. And we're going to continue with our reading of the sutras. And I said we're up to book 2 of the sutras, Treading the Path. And we are on to verse 4 of book 2. So I'm going to assume that you're all set up here as comfortable as you can be for the end of our practice. If need be, you can pause and get yourself ready. So letting yourself really rest down here into whatever support is offered to you. So that could be the support of the chair if you've got the legs inverted, or you might have them inverted up on the sofa, side of a bed, wherever you're working. Or it could be that the legs are supported by the ground. You might have the legs lengthened out along the floor. Or you might have the soles of the feet in contact with the floor and the knees lifted. So really finding whatever support is offered to you, finding that support and allowing yourself to rest down fully into that support. And letting the rest of the back of the body rest down deeply here. And again, maybe noticing the curves of the spine, how they interact with the ground. And if you haven't already, I'm going to invite you to soften and close the eyes. So, coming to verse 4 of book 2 of the sutras. Ignorance of our real nature is the source of the other 4, whether they be dormant, weak, suspended, or fully active. Ignorance is the failure to discriminate between the permanent and the impermanent, the pure and the impure, bliss and suffering, the self and the non-self. Egoism, the limiting sense of I, results from the individual intellect's attributing the power of consciousness to itself. Attachment is clinging to pleasure. Aversion is clinging to pain. And the fear of death is a spontaneous feeling deeply rooted in us all, no matter how learned we may be. So I'll read that again. Ignorance of our real nature is the source of the other 4, whether they be dormant, weak, suspended, or fully active. Ignorance is the failure to discriminate between the permanent and the impermanent, the pure and the impure, bliss and suffering, the self and the non-self. Egoism, the limiting sense of I, results from the individual intellect's attributing the power of consciousness to itself. Attachment is clinging to pleasure. Aversion is clinging to pain. And the fear of death is a spontaneous feeling, deeply rooted in us all, no matter how learned we may be. So giving ourselves a few moments here to let those words land. Allowing ourselves to receive the benefits of the practice that we've completed. And allowing the words of the sutras to absorb. So we're going to begin to come out of this now. So if you're working with your legs inverted, it might be useful to draw the knees in towards the chest here and have a little rock from side to side. And if you're working with your sort of legs along the floor or in constructive rest, maybe letting the fingers and toes begin to move, letting the head turn gently from one side to the other. And then if you've been working with the legs inverted and you have them drawn in towards you now, maybe wriggling back a little bit so that you can let the legs fully extend out along the floor. Or if that's not so comfortable in the back, coming into your constructive rest position with the feet on the floor and the knees up towards the ceiling. And then, as always, if you would like to, let's generate some heat in the palms of the hands. And placing the hands wherever's of benefit for you. So it could be over the eyes or elsewhere. And eventually letting the eyes open, adjust to the light in the room. And when you're ready, letting the eyes fully open. Let's gather the knees in towards the chest, have a little rock from side to side, allowing the lower back to really release here. And then letting that momentum take us all the way over to rest for a few moments on one side of the body. And then when you're ready, or you can stay there if you want to for as long as you want, but if you would like to, coming up from there to a comfortable seated position. And maybe bringing the hands into prayer position in the front of the chest to let everything settle and find its place again. So we will leave that there for this week's practice. I hope that was of use to some of you. It can be used as a full practice, so if you kind of want to take out little sort of sequences or little movements that we did and kind of just intersperse them into your, whatever practice you're using at the moment, or just do a few of them throughout the day, I highly recommend it. Yeah, especially for lower backs at the minute, because a lot of us are working from home and it's not our usual setup, so it'll probably be really beneficial for a lot of us. So yeah, we'll leave it there. As always, if you've got any questions or if you've got any requests, anything, do let me know. I'm always here, and I will see you next time. Take care. Bye.